This thing still has a blown head gasket. Anyways, let's get to pulling the top end of this motor off. First step, get the motor to top dead center. Then I can mark everything, and when I put it back together, as long as I don't bump the starter in between, it's way easier to line up the T-belt. And if you don't have it lined up on the timing marks, it's a real pain in the ass. Let's get tearing this thing apart. How many electrical connections am I gonna wreck? How many hoses will make this helpful in some ways? I said I was gonna set it top dead center. How do I do that? Well, in my case, I've got my fan, my E-fan, Ford Taurus fan, but it makes it really hard for me to get down to the crank bolt. So I'm gonna pop the fan out, which got to come out of the way anyways, and then I put a big breaker bar on the cam bolt, and then I got to pull out spark plug number 1, and then we got to turn the crank bolt to the right until we are top dead center on the compression stroke. So typically I'll drop a chopstick down there. Once it gets to the very top of its stroke, then you're good. You also have to make sure that it's the compression stroke, not the exhaust stroke. The chopstick will go to the top on the exhaust stroke as well. So you have to stick your finger down the hole and feel when you're on the compression stroke, and it'll be pushing air at your finger. It's really hard to get your fingers down there. Have fun. And if you know you're on the compression stroke, then make sure you're at the top. Then when you take everything apart, you can mark it, and you can just set everything back up with those marks. Step 1, let's get this Ford Taurus electric fan out of the way and get a breaker bar on that crank bolt. I also should dump the fluid here, or the coolant, and get it out of the way, and start taking everything off the top of this. It's pretty stripped down. I got lots of room to work. Don't have any of the charcoal canisters and emission stuff left. I got it top dead center. Some other signs showing me that I got it perfect. I'm about 15 degrees advanced on my timing marks, which is about where I was. And then if I pop this up, you can see my my wires are actually labeled. So this is plug number 1, and you need it firing, pointing at number 1 when you're at top dead center. Also, if you do take the distributor out, it's got a splined head. So if I actually pop this out, it'll probably be pointing about here by the time I pop it out. It's going to twist up like that. So if you're trying to put it back in, you have to kind of start with it here, and it's going to drop in, but you want it pointing at cylinder number 1. I drew that mark on there, but between that and this, and then once I take the timing belt covers off, I'm going to mark it. Then when I pull everything off, I just reline up all the marks, fire it back up. Well, I popped most of the electrical, most of the plumbing off of it so far. But let's pull this plenum off. There's a couple hoses up underneath, hoses and wires connections, so I'll have to unhook. Plenum will come off, and then valve covers will come off. Timing cover, and we are getting close. So next up, we'll pull out the wiring harness. Then we're going to pull out the fuel rails. Got to pull the distributor and timing cover. I've got the all the stuff I had off for the EFI swap. Just to the point where I'm about to pull the heads themselves. Took the remainder of the stuff off so I could take the timing belt off. So I got to take the sprockets off. But before I do that, I'm just taking my headers off, because as soon as the head is bolted, it's going to be really hard to get the header bolts, because the header bolts are stupidly tight. But once I get those off, then we'll get to unbolting those heads. And as much as I like to be a lunatic about my stuff, I do know enough about Nissan heads that they do have a torque spec, and it's quite important. A torque spec and also a torque sequence, which you're supposed to loosen them off in the reverse sequence. And then you're also supposed to put the bolts back in the same holes. So that's what my cardboard box here is for. I'm going to poke the whole bolts through as I unbolt them, which will keep track of where they go. Hopefully I don't mess it up. Also, you'll notice right hand, left hand, it's always as if you're sitting in the driver's seat. So if you're standing at the front, we got left hand, right hand. It's super confusing for a burnout like me. This is the right hand side of the motor here with my left hand. Anyways, let's get those header bolts off. It's probably beer o'clock here. It's been a long afternoon so far. Ain't that always the way? And literally the last thing to do now is unbolt the 13 or 14 head bolts in that correct pattern that I had on the sheet. And of course, I can't find or don't know if I have a 10 mil cap screw. I have a 10 mil Allen wrench, but that would not be any fun to do with an Allen wrench. So, unfortunately, that might be the end of my day messing around with this right before I get it, that final little part, last part, apart. Well, back up in the shop again on day 2 of this project, because everything in my life in the shop seems to take 2 days because I'm slow as hell. I hit the wall yesterday afternoon because I didn't have a 10 mil Allen socket for the cap screws on the head, and this was the biggest one that I had, 3/8. I messaged a couple buddies. They have 10 mil, but of course they're about the same size as this, which is kind of a standard one. That, because this is a stupid Nissan, it's not gonna work. Because as you can see, well, first of all, there's 14 cap screws, but, well, they're that far down there. So I'm gonna have to cut this thing around here somewhere just so I can get to these long bolts. Otherwise, there's no way I'm gonna be able to get those off. Thankfully, at least they did little cutouts so I can get the Allen in there. But still annoying because, as you can see, a standard Allen is not gonna work for me. So that's fun. Here at Pathmaker Speed Shop, where we have to cut tools and make other tools. But we'll just cut this, and then we'll slip a 10 mil socket over the top, and we'll continue on unbolting these heads. Well, I'm winning. But of course, I was hoping I'd be able to lift this off with the header unbolted, but just sitting there. Unfortunately, I can't. So I have to climb underneath and unbolt the Y pipe on both sides, which is like 6 super rusty bolts. Now that I spilled a whole bunch of coolant on the floor. Should have probably done that first. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Hopefully once I do that, the headers will be loose enough that I'll actually be able to lift this head off here. Side number 1 is off. And unfortunately, there's nowhere that I can really see evidently where it was leaking. On this side or the other side. I was hoping there was going to be a big red arrow pointing right there, and then I wouldn't have to take that side off. But let's take that side off. Let's see what we're going to see. Next step is going to be to scrape off and clean off that surface on both this and on the heads. Throw a new gasket on, and then just bolt everything back up again. Oh man, that's a lot of work to get down to here. That's how you take apart a VG30i, which is the same as a VG30E, essentially. Either way, let's get scraping this gasket off. All right, time for another episode of doing stupid shit the wrong way. I was struggling with the hose, so the vacuum is now strapped to my cage, hanging off the hood, so that I could vacuum as I go and try not to fill all the oil passages full of shum. A little more scraping to do, and then I have to decide if I'm getting out the sanding block and running across. In theory, I'm supposed to take it all down completely flat, but I'm also pretty lazy and don't know what I'm doing. Well, let's figure it out as we go show. So we're going to continue moving forward with this. Scrape that off and see how clean we can get this. And then we'll take a look at the head side. Pretty happy with this end, honestly. I left a couple little scratches, but they're just real surface scratches. It's a steel block. Don't think I'm going to hit this end with plywood or with sandpaper at all. But time to go start messing around with the heads because they need the same treatment. Scrape the heads down, scrape the gaskets off, gave it a spray with some brake clean. Not gonna lie, doesn't look great. Looks like the gasket's all off, but I could probably spend hours obsessing over it from this point. But I don't know, I think I'm just gonna make sure that I've got no shum in any of the holes. Then I'm probably just gonna bolt this thing all back together and we can go wheeling. Right, Puss? Throw the other head gasket on, bolt the heads back up, and we can start moving back forward. Oh, the head gasket bolting up process, it's ridiculous. 14 bolts on each head. You got to do them in order, 22 pounds, and then loosen them all the way off. And then you got to do them in order, 44 pounds, and then loosen them all the way off. And then 22 again, and then 44 again. And then I believe you're send them home. Or not send them home, I think you're good. I don't know, something like that. I got the instructions written down over there. But thanks, Nissan. Heads are back on. I just have the bolts ran in finger loose right now. But it's time to go around in order at 22 foot-pounds. And then again at 49 foot-pounds. So it's going to be a pain in the ass. You have to do it in that order. And now I'm back to putting the cam gears on. There's a mark that I made on the back of the cover on each side. And there's a mark on the pulley itself. So you can make sure. Also, once you get the belt up, you can count how many in the manual. There's a... it'll tell you how many notches you should have between the two dots, which is super important, or else you'll mess up your valves. I'm going to throw this timing belt back on, and we'll see if we can get the front of this motor buttoned up. Of course, my marks aren't lined up anymore, so bear with me, because I've spun the motor a few times. But, well, it's a real pain in the ass, because you need to line up the belt with this mark on the cam. There's a little divot, which I put some white paint pen, and this one, there has to be 40 teeth in between. And then there's 43 teeth from this mark to the mark on the cam gear. So you have to make sure that the motor's set at top dead center, and then you have this cam still set up. If you didn't spin it when you took it off, you're doing good. And then you need 40 teeth between and 43 teeth. And then you got to spin the motor over a few times, and you got to figure out the tension, and it's super convoluted. So I think I've got all of that figured out. I believe it's still back on top dead center, but of course it's all a little bit vague. The way to get the tension is you're supposed to have 22 pounds of force and have a 1/2 inch of movement on the belt right there. And then you loosen that off. You put a feeler gauge that fits and slides through there. But I did that, and then the belt seemed really, really loose. But you don't want to have the belt too tight, or you break the snouts off the cams and you get belt wind. But I also don't want to come back in here to mess with the tensioner again. So, do I have it right? I don't know. But hopefully, I'm going to spin it a few more times, make sure it's all good. And if I can consider it good enough, you can tell I'm really not sure about it, hence why I keep spinning around. Once I figure that out, I can send all the bolts home on everything, and hopefully we make this thing run today. But I've said that a few times already, and here I am, still without it running. Well, boys, I just fired it up for the first time, and it is not sounding as happy as I was hoping. In fact, it sounds downright unhappy. So I'm not really sure what I've done, but it's not good. So don't follow any of my instructions, because I'm a moron. Alright, well, another day out here working on the Pathfinder. I ended the last video pulling everything back apart because I got my timing belt too tight. And I've just been out here for, I don't know, last hour and a half, messing around. Still just not sure reading things on the internet, watching YouTube videos. I can't figure it out. I can't get the damn belt right. Not like their picture shows. But just had a revelation that I think will fix my problem, gets me to where the drawing should be, and maybe explains my damn problem. So I figured I would share this information because I didn't see it mentioned anywhere. Well, the instructions do mention when you put the tensioner on that you rotate it all the way to the right till it stops. What that means is you actually rotate it far enough that the spring bounces around a second time, the tensioner spring, and then it actually rests properly. I just slid the thing on. I had just slid the tensioner on, and then the tensioner spring was just kind of floating around out here. But if you tighten it all the way, this spring will spin around and lock now tight, which now puts the adjustment hole down on this corner, finally, like their drawing shows. And we have, just like this, and we have a bit of tension on there, but not too much. So that's where I was going wrong. I had not tensioned that tension spring, which is super rusty. They didn't send me a new tension spring with my kit. I'm not very happy with that. But either way, now I think I should be able to set this thing. I think it's good enough, now that I finally figured the spring out, that I'm going to slap it back together. See if we can make this thing run. Fingers crossed, because I don't want to keep taking it apart. No fun. All right, boys. Well, moment of truth then. We put the timing belt back together for the second time now, and new head gaskets on. So last time we could definitely hear the belt whizzing, sounded like a supercharger because the belt was too tight. So this time, let's hope there's no belt whizzing. Not even any warning lights. Sounds like I might have a vacuum leak. There might have an exhaust leak. And I definitely need to work on my timing. But sure sounds a hell of a lot happier than it did last time. Well, let me track down this vacuum leak and get this thing timed, but things are looking up. Things are looking up. Well, the longer I have it run, the less confident I am that it's happy. I don't know if that's timing belt slap or a brutal exhaust leak or something, but something doesn't sound very happy on this side. So, I don't know what that means. Probably just means we're going to change the oil and go wheeling. I don't know. Well, quick oil change. Threw the fan back in. Still got the click. Not 100% sure. But, I don't know. Sounds to me like it's good enough to go out and do some wheeling. So, it's a little late in the day. Wife's coming home soon. Got to get some dinner figured out. But tomorrow, I might have to take it out of the woods, or at least on the weekend. So, stay tuned, and we'll get this old hunk of junk back on the trail. And hopefully, it's running good after the new head gasket and timing belt. Who knows? Who knows? I'm a terrible mechanic. Cheers, boys.